Hello and welcome to this, the 14th, I think, episode of the KurosawaCast. My name is, as ever, Rob Beams. I'm joined as ever by Craig Ennis, and we are talking about the 1958. I looked down at my notes just then. It says 1952. I'm pretty sure it's 1958. The 1958 Kurosawa film, The Hidden Fortress, a sort of fantasy historical. I wouldn't necessarily say epic, fantasy adventure story, which had an influence on Star Wars famously. And for those of you new to the show, I am a Kurosawa fan. I've seen all the films multiple times. This was probably my fourth or fifth viewing of Hidden Fortress. For you, Craig, it was your first time. That's the gimmick. You're coming fresh to the party. So let's start off with what your expectations were from last time. You normally at the end of an episode sort of presage your sort of thoughts on what the next one's going to be like. So where were you with what Hidden Fortress was going to be in your?
I knew that it used a couple of squabbling peasants as like a framing device, as a way to get you into the story and carry you through the story, because that's what I knew of it in terms of the Star Wars kind of connection. And I was expecting a kind of much more. I was kind of expecting like a reskinned Star Wars, basically, with the Hidden Fortress being like the Death Star.
Yeah,
like this kind of, I don't know, maybe somewhere where the bad guys were working out of, but no one could find, kind of thing. And I knew that there was a princess as well, and I was expecting them to have to rescue the princess from a hidden fortress. I was expecting a kind of adventure romp from the film, basically.
Yeah,
but one that hit the story beats of Star Wars.
Yeah, I said, I think last time as well, that I cautioned you not to bring your Star Wars sort of the angle into it too much watching it the first time, because when I watched it the first time as well, I did the same thing, and I ended up being kind of curiously underwhelmed, because I was sort of like, that's not really as much like Star Wars as I sort of expected going in. And I think the key thing is that it's an influence on Star Wars. Star Wars isn't a remake of Hidden Fortress. So there are parallels, and I would argue there are things from Hidden Fortress that filter into the Star Wars prequels. Even there are elements.
Oh, definitely,
Star Wars films. But it's not. It's nothing. It's not like in the same way that Magnificent Seven is Seven Samurai. The Star Wars connection with Hidden Fortress is much smaller than that. So let's give a very high level sort of view of what it is. It's very simple. It's basically, if you've been watching with us since the beginning, it's basically a stealth remake of Those Who Tread the Tiger's Tail, which was a 1945 film Kurosawa made at the end of the war, very low budget, that he always said he wanted to remake one day. And I kind of feel like this is his remake of that, where basically the gimmick of that film was a group of monks were trying to smuggle a royal across enemy territory and over a border back home. And in that one, it's very slight and it's fairly short, and there's not a lot that goes on. There's like one confrontation at a border checkpoint. This is that basic same setup, only it's not a bunch of monks. It's Toshiro Mifune as a general and a couple of peasants who've been on the losing side, I think, in a battle, and they're trying to get home as well. And the princess in this case, rather than I think some kind of prince or lord in the other one, the princess is going to get smuggled back into her territory across enemy territory, and it's how to get her there. An added rub is they've also got shitloads of gold they've hidden, and they want to sneak all the gold back as well. The gold's been hidden in these like wooden rods, and they're pretending to be woodcutters, I guess. They're trying to take the wood along, and there's a few bits in the film where the question of people inspecting the wood and things like that comes into play, and there's a little bit of tension about getting the gold across as well. So that's basically all there is to it. They've got to try and get the gold and the princess into another territory. The Japanese title of the film is more interesting than the English title. Do you know the Japanese title?
No idea.
It translates as Three Bad Men in a Hidden Fortress, which adds a different wrinkle to it, because you don't necessarily, the first time you hear that, you think, who are the three bad men? But it kind of says something about the way Kurosawa is coming at it from. Because you've got the two of the bad men you can obviously see as being these farmers who are greedy, they are selfish, they want to steal the gold and double cross the princess and the general every chance they get. But the title frames the Toshiro Mifune character, the general, as being equally bad to them. And we see that in the film in his adherence to Japanese codes of honor and to Japanese class hierarchy. And the fact that, and this is something, again, that's in Tiger's Tail. Tiger's Tail, if you remember, the main kind of twist on that is that the border guard played by Suzumu Fujita, who is also the border guard in this one, who's favorable towards them. He kind of reprises the role of the nice border guard, Suzumu Fujita does. In both of those films, in Tiger's Tail, the Susumu Fujita guard character, he's the actor who was in the Sanshiro Sugata films, who's the main character in those. He basically endears him to the people trying to sneak the prince or the lord over the border. The fact that the lord acts so lowly in the plight to get over, he acts like he's just another one of the monks, or he's their attendant or their like bag carrier, isn't he? Basically, the lord. And the idea is that, he obviously can't be a lord because a lord wouldn't be treated like that, and they wouldn't shout at the lord that way. They wouldn't be able to bring themselves to do it, even as a cover. And there's a similar element to this where more understated than it is in Tiger's Tail, but there's an element to it in this where the princess is similarly, she's there pretending to be a mute girl, she's there carrying wood like everybody else, and so that's part of the way she's able to blend in is by that kind of not adhering to the traditional codes is kind of how they're able to escape. And it's that adherence to those codes that's why Mifune is one of the bad men in the title, because he actually in a presage to the Star Wars prequels, he has his 16-year-old sister beheaded as a decoy for the Queen Amidala surrogate here for the princess, and which she chastises him for and says, look, I'm a 16-year-old woman as well, just because I'm a princess, and you don't even shed a tear for your sister. So that's kind of why I think he's one of the bad men as well, and what the film's sort of saying about the feudal codes and the samurai codes and all that sort of stuff. So that's basically the high level notes on it. Let's go in with what, I've talked a lot on the off. What's your sort of overview of how you felt about it coming out of it?
I really enjoyed this. I thought it was quite slight in terms of, obviously, that if again, complete ignorance of Japanese social cues, historical class structures and things kind of definitely strip an element out of this. And but that's all right, because right at the end it's all explained anyway. There's kind of a hat on a hat for those of us who are not in the know, where it's all kind of explained about how they've seen how other people live and things like that. I found it very kind of slight, but like a very, very well made, slick action adventure romp, basically. Like it's a crowd pleaser, this film, I think, even more so than, especially with the running time being that much shorter than, say, Seven Samurai. Seven Samurai's got so much more going on, but this would be like this seems like some sort of big budget. Romp is the best word for it, really. It's just a really cracking adventure story with some characters who you really get to spend time with and get to know. There's some great set pieces in it as well. I mean, the two characters, talk about the actual opening shots, but like in the early scenes after the battle's been won, the victors have kind of rounded up everybody, and they're shooing them into this castle to try and dig out for some missing gold. And there's just so many people, just swathes and swathes of people in these big grand sets as well. It looks like something sort of on the scale of Game of Thrones.
He sort of in that sequence he kind of, I don't know if it's deliberate homage, possibly is, to one of the most homage sequences in film history, but there's almost an Odessa Steps Battleship Potemkin bit, isn't there, where the slave revolt are coming down the steps and they're getting fired on by the soldiers as they go and people are tumbling down the steps. But yeah, there's such a production value to that. There's this huge castle, there's hundreds of extras.
It just looks absolutely incredible. There's also, I've also put a bit here where they're shoving all these people down to a hole to dig. There's like too many people down there. First of all, it makes you think that it's some sort of mass grave. But I was just thinking, it's too many. It's counterproductive to what you're actually trying to achieve.
I said the same thing. I said the same thing to my wife watching it the other day. Just like, they could do with half as many people in the hole. There's not room for some of those people to even dig.
Yeah, massively counterproductive. But yeah, film never really kind of approaches that sort of scale again. It's something you see at the beginning because they go off and they're being stealthy and they're trying to get through. But it was, the sense of it's really good. I really like the opening scene with the two fellas arguing, and you do get that kind of, you can see where 3PO and R2D2 have come from. I mean, they're more foul-mouthed. I mean, you don't know what
you don't know what R2's getting away with, yeah.
No, exactly. But I like the phrase "shitworm" comes up multiple times in the first minute or so, and there's a great shot as people on horseback with the flags. They just kind of ignore them, like they're so lowly. No, they're constantly throughout the whole film. These two characters, whenever on their own, everyone's just ignoring them, or at least kind of, if not ignoring them, it takes at least a double take for them to actually pay them any mind. Like,
yeah,
they're not. They're initially inconspicuous. No one really cares what these characters are doing all the way through. Yeah, I mean, it sets it all up really, really well, and really, really kind of efficiently as well, I thought. And you've got these two bickering fellas who just kind of bumble and fall and stumble their way from one location to another. Yeah, and then you're away. Like, the film just kind of carries on at a pace. Like, Mifune shows up wearing Y fronts and sort of just take control of the situation straight away, and it moves. You get to the hidden fortress really, really quickly, and it's basically a shack with with an
underused Takashi Shimura in it.
Yeah. And you only spend about 5 minutes there, and then you're off.
Yeah.
So, pretty quickly after that, I kind of realized, this is going to be something slightly different than what I was expecting it to be. Yeah, I mean, you just kind of, like I said, you just bounces along at a really rapid pace. Like, you meet the princess. There's some talk about her being raised as a boy, and she's very kind of forthright and outspoken, and and really quite strong and powerful. So, to keep up with the Kurosawa doesn't do strong and powerful women narrative, she's immediately told that she has to play a mute for the next hour or so of the film. But yeah, it just becomes really plot driven. From, we need to get from A to B to A to B to A, and it's so quick and so pacey that it just kind of you whip through it. And it's constantly enjoyable. It's constantly funny, and it's constantly and the action beats and the set pieces are done really well. There's a great bit, sort of maybe an hour and 20 minutes into it, where all these sort of where they're looking for the 4 people and the 2 horses, but they've picked up an extra. They've picked up a girl from who was sort of who's been enslaved at a brothel, and they've picked her up and taken her with them.
Your mic keeps popping, by the way.
Sorry. Yeah, they've picked her up. This kind of lord comes along and kind of buys their horses without kind of really giving them any
their opinion on it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so all of a sudden they're walking along the high street as people are looking for these. They're walking along the high street, walking along this road as people are looking for the
past Smiths.
Yeah, and they go, "Oh, have you seen 4 people with 2 horses and a load of sticks?" And they go, "No, we haven't." And then they go, "Oh, well, they've got a load of sticks, and there's an extra one." But these people come back, and then they kind of twig who they are. And Mifune gets into a fight, and 2 people ride off, and he kills one of them, jumps on the horse, and then kind of rides off after them in this horse chase sequence.
Return of the Jedi.
Yeah, really well done. And then he kind of rides into those who tread on the tiger's tail.
Yes.
Rides into a little garrison, and the gates close behind him. And there is he challenges the the commander there to a spear fight that kind of, this all happened. The spear fight goes on quite a while actually, but it's all kind of, it just the pace and the geography and the way that the film just the plot just flows at such a lovely rhythm. It's just a delight, really.
It is. This film marks, I would say, the solid kind of start, maybe Throne of Blood before this, although Mifune does go crazy in that. This, for me, represents the beginning of late Mifune, where in the earlier films, he's unhinged, he's crazy, he shouts, he mugs, he's over the top, he moves around like a jungle cat, kind of prancing around. From this point on, Mifune is, in all the Kurosawa films I've seen him in, Mifune is stoic. He's very still. He rarely speaks. He's a complete badass. And this is the kind of Mifune character from this point onwards. And in this, the scene with the spear fight, he's just such a badass in that scene. Like, he's incredible badass. Like, when he goes around taking all of the spears off the soldiers to try and find one he likes, he's testing them all out, and everyone's scared of him, and he's so nonchalant. And then after he wins the spear fight, the way he just really casually throws it back to the guy who took it off and rides off with a smile. He's such a badass in this movie. In a way that, I know that's not the most intelligent film criticism, but Mifune in this film is an absolute badass in a way that I don't think he's been, even in Seven Samurai, he's not a badass in that, is he? He's like the funny, weird one,
Yeah.
So it's kind of really fun to see. And I think you'll see him in, the Yojimbo role, he's kind of similar to this, really, in that. It's a similar sort of, he's a bit more sly and slightly, sardonic in that role. But there's definitely this part of him now where he is the silent, ultra competent hero from this point on. One thing I want to say about this as well, I think you were talking about the pacing of it, and I think there's often really nice pacing to movies that have this kind of journey from A to B structure,
the road movie thing, yeah,
and that's the thing, they're always going forward, they're always on the way. I think that's one of the reasons why this is a really weird pull, it's so not the same kind of movie, but it's probably one of the reasons that Locke is compelling, the Tom Hardy movie in the car, because even though it's just a guy talking on the phone, he's talking to a few people on the phone, there's always the forward momentum because he's literally on the way to that hospital to go see his wife, and everything's going on about him going down that motorway and about trying to get somewhere. And I think movies where people, even in that case, extreme example, because it's basically one scene in one object as he kind of goes down the road, but it's you just always get that feeling with films like that, don't you, of them moving forward. There's momentum to journeys in films.
Yeah,
and
I thought you were going to say
what's going on here.
I thought you were going to.
Yeah, that's true as well. Dumb and Dumber. If we're going down the Farrelly route, Dumb and Dumber is another one. But there is that forward momentum to this, and they aren't, the only time they sort of sit still is in the Hidden Fortress. They're there for slightly longer than you were saying, because the guys are sort of put to work by Mifune there for a bit, and they try and betray him there, and they go to a little pond and they kind of make rice and they do stuff there. So they're there for a little while. But after they leave that point, they are just on the road and there's no way back. The fortress gets burned behind them. There's no way back. Now they must just go forward, and they are marching towards that border. And they get involved in this local fire festival, which
have a little bit of a dance and a sing song.
Have a dance there, but it's there's a great forward momentum to it, and it is, like you say, it is a romp. I want to mention as well. Well, there's another great bit I want to mention actually, when it's one of the peasants who comes up with the plan to he kind of impresses Mifune originally by saying, well, we're going to go back home by going through this other neutral territory to our war, because the border's not going to be as sort of fiercely sort of guarded on that way. So we're going to go that way. And Mifune's very impressed by this. But you get in that the same thing as in Seven Samurai, where you have someone literally drawing a map, which I was sucker for. He's in the sand, he's in the dirt, going, this is where we are, this is where we need to go. We're going to go here to get there. And Kurosawa, in Seven Samurai, but I think in some of the other films as well before that, he loves a plan. He loves a clear, this is where we're going to go. And that always adds to that kind of forward momentum and everything in these films as well, because you have a clear idea of the geography and the stakes and the goal of what's going on, which you don't always get in a modern action film. You sometimes sort of, okay, but why are we here now? And where are we actually trying to get? And how far are we from there? Whereas you kind of always feel in Kurosawa films.
Yeah, definitely. It's all very, very clear stakes. It's we need to get here. We need to carry this with us. This stuff is heavy. We need. Sorry, there was just some sort of almost an accident outside. Yeah, we need to get here. We need to carry this stuff. There's people behind us. We can't stop. If we've got to look after this wood, there's a bit in the at the fire festival where they kind of think they've brought the locals think they've brought the wood along to be burnt on the fire, and so they just have to go along with it. And they kind of go, you're kind of thinking, there's all this gold in this wood. What's going to happen next? Not a lot, as it turns out. They just kind of wait for the fire to go out and then recollect the gold. But it's kind of, you understand the stakes of more or less everything. You understand, even though, you know, I do feel like the princess character is slightly underserved by being made mute for most of the film. She's established well enough at the beginning to know that she is outspoken and a bit of a badass and can hold her own and probably a decent fighter too. So when she is being sort of you know, abused or belittled by people they meet along the way, you know that it's very difficult for her to keep quiet about it. So like there's a real kind of tension about her keeping her cover as well. Or when the peasants are sort of scheming to steal everything because Mufino's gone away, and they're just freely talking in front of her because they think she can't hear, and she's kind of like, how's she going to react to this situation kind of thing. It's really everything kind of, there doesn't seem to be a wasted moment. Everything's got something else going. Like I say, it's plot driven, but all the kind of the undercurrents and things like that, the kind of the tension of the disguise, the need to transport the gold. It's not just having a fortune. It's the idea that the gold is going to be used to rebuild this house for this family, and you know, sort of repatriate all the people and that kind of thing. So there's a purpose for the money as well. Everything's got stakes to it, like constantly, and you understand those stakes in a way that it isn't just action or action for the sake of giving them something to do. Everything is got a purpose and an aim to it. And again, I think you're right, that kind of the clearness of that narrative. I mean, it is a simple narrative, but the clearness of it is what keeps that pace going. This is really well constructed. Like I say, I think it's quite a slight film.
I agree.
But I don't mean that as in fact, I don't mean to say that as to disparage. If anything, it's more. It's the amount of action films that you see that aren't about anything, that aren't as successful as this, but perhaps show you how difficult it is to get it right. If that makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I do, and I think when you said it was slight at the start, I couldn't agree more. Like, the first time I saw this film, I was kind of underwhelmed by it, partly because I was watching it with that Star Wars connection in mind, and it wasn't what I expected it to be, and it ended up being, for me, one of the lesser tier Kurosawas. I was sort of like, even when I really got into him, for me it was like mid tier or lower tier, and every time I've seen it since, it's grown. I've gained more appreciation for it. I think it's a deceptively simple film. Like, it is very slight, it feels very deceptively simple. It feels deceptively easy. And actually, when you start to sit down and look at it, it's very tight. Like, it's really well together.
It's crafted. It's a crafted film. It's like there's kind of a like a fine clockwork thing going on here. Like, everything's really precision. It's very precise. It's kind of precision engineering to get that kind of thing going on in a way that I don't know. I think there's lots of films like this that aren't made by directors of the caliber of Kurosawa that wouldn't. It wouldn't necessarily, if it had been made by somebody else, you wouldn't necessarily think of it as an auteurist kind of cinema. You just think of it as mainstream entertainment, I think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I feel like this is a dated reference both ways along. But like one of the things that Donald Ritchie says about it in writing about it contemporaneously in the 50s is he says that the film is like if Brunel, whose films I've never seen, he says the film is like if Brunel had directed The Mark of Zorro. And you can see what he's going for with that, right? But you can see what he's saying.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
He's saying it's this in the equivalent of modern day. I guess it's like saying, oh, it's like if Denis Villeneuve made the new Transformers, or it's like if, I don't know, maybe Denis Villeneuve would make a Transformers. Wong Kar-wai. It's like if Wong Kar-wai made Transformers, And I think there's something to that, like this, because he talks about in the Ritchie book on this one, he talks about how a lot of the elements of the Chambara, the Japanese historical sword fighting film, how they're in there, and he goes through the elements in this film of behind enemy lines journey and the princess and all these elements that are in there that are supposedly almost hallmarks of this genre, and talks about how Kurosawa gets them all in there but makes a film that's better than all the other versions of that film, and also the only one of its kind that features and foregrounds members of the lower caste as well, because it starts, and this is where that Star Wars connection comes in, as you said earlier, like it starts from the point of view of the lowliest characters who wouldn't get any sort of role of any size in a traditional Japanese movie of this kind. It would only care about the princess and the general and people.
I mean, there is a layer of that. There is a layer of class commentary on this, but it's it's gold plating. It's a layer. It's not where it's not where the true pleasures of this film lie, if you know what I mean.
No, it isn't.
It's like it to talk about it in those terms kind of reminds me of those kind of press junkets you see where the actors are saying, well, the reason I took on Transformers 6 was because it was actually about things. It wasn't just your usual running, jumping and shouting.
I guess, but there's something that Seven Samurai and Hidden Fortress both have, and it isn't the foregrounded thing, but they both question is too weak a word for it. They both play against the usual tropes for the way that Japanese historical class representation's done. So, and that would have been much more, I think, visible if you're Japanese and if you're watching it at the time it came out. But usually those sort of things are done in a less complicated way, where the heroes are heroic, the people who are samurai and whatever, they are good and they're noble and they're heroic. And Kurosawa sort of peels away layers of that, whether it's in Seven Samurai having the Mifune character be this farmer who gives his speech about how samurai are actually complete cunts and that's why the farmers are right to behave the way they behave, or whether it's the title of this film suggesting that the Mifune character is just as bad as the farmers. He is doing something with that, and I agree it's not the main thing, but it's part of what he's doing. Ritchie writes about it: if the farmers are bad, it's because they're too human, and if the general's bad, it's because he's inhuman. And I think that's an interesting element to it. That's definitely in the film, even if it's not the draw.
Yeah, no, absolutely, it's there, and it enriches the whole thing. I think, like I say, that they kind of one of the kind of through lines that I've noticed throughout the films that we've watched so far is, Kurosawa is quite often sort of subtle as a sledgehammer at the end. Like he wants to make sure that you've left knowing you've got it at the end, and they ram that home. He does ram it home at the end with all the kind of I've seen what life is like and blah blah blah, and then the two squabbling peasants have only got one single piece of gold between them at the end, and you have it, no, you have it, no, you like, and so. It's there, and it is there, and you can kind of unravel it, and it holds. It's not like it's hokey or anything like that. It's all got a logic to it, and it fits together properly. But like I said before, it's not where the pleasure of the film is. The pleasure of the film is the romp. The pleasure of the film is the story and the plot and the adventure and the road trip. And that's what I really liked about it. It was so easy to watch this film, just so incredibly. I've been watching. Like if this had been an English language film or an American film, if this would be, I could see this being as much as of a bank holiday dad film as Bridge on the River Kwai or The Great Escape or Dirty Dozen or any of those films. You know, this would have been a perennial kind of bank holiday film when we were kids, kind of thing. It's you know it's as good as any of those.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which although I've said on previous podcasts I've never brought up with, I've started watching a few of those recently and quite enjoyed them. So I'm getting a little bit more au fait with them.
More dad film. More dad film savvy. I wanted to go through, just because the famous thing with Hidden Fortress is to some extent this connection to Star Wars. The Criterion Channel do actually have an intro to this film, which is
I watched that.
Which is Lucas talking about it, and he's always talked about it. This idea of the peasants being the thing that are the droids and all of that, and that being an influence for that reason. He also talks a lot on that he talks a little bit on that about how Kurosawa's use of long lenses was very influential to him, isolating people from backgrounds and things like that. So there's a few things there that he brings up, that he kind of always brings up when he talks about the relationship. But I also made a list pointlessly of the things I think that are in this film that are in Star Wars.
There's only one that I really noticed. So before you go through your list, it seemed that the Tadakuro Maccabi relationship was a little Anakin. Little Anakin Vader at the end.
Yeah, I picked up on that as well. Like towards the end, there is definitely that feeling. And by the way,
he's got a scarred face, and he's had he had a fight with his former mentor, and yeah.
And the thing is, I want to say this as well. I'm not making out that Lucas consciously took these things and decided to be made in Star Wars, but the fact that he saw this when he was very young, like this is one of those films for Lucas that was part of his like film school broadening of his movie horizons movie. Like this is a foundational text, I think, for Lucas in a way, and a lot of that kind of Kurosawa stuff in the series, because it's the stuff that kind of turned him on at film school. So a lot of this is kind of in his DNA, I think, as a filmmaker. So I'm not necessarily making claims that's a direct reference, but I agree. Like I think that's in there. The other things obviously in Kurosawa films that we've talked about before is the use of wipes. We talked about in Seven Samurai, the scene where they go looking for the samurai, how reminiscent that is of Mos Eisley. So that's definitely in there, like the way they're looking around and seeing all these weird characters around and the way that's all shot. Another thing is, I think, and I'm going to get more into the Hidden Fortress ones, but I'm just gathering up the ones from previous as well. Tiger's Tale begins, do you remember, with text that talks about all these exciting things.
A lot of the early films begin with text.
But they explain things in Tiger's Tale. The reason I bring up Tiger's Tale is because it explains all these things that happened that are way more exciting than what happens in Tiger's Tale, that are not shown in the film, that are all kind of talked about as having happened. And one of those things in Tiger's Tale is that it's a period of civil war, right? That's relevant because obviously it's the opening line of A New Hope's title crawl. But that's also something Ritchie points out about this film, is that this film, which we know for sure Lucas did see, is set during a period of civil war. So there's a link there. I mentioned when you were talking about the chase to the camp, that's Return of the Jedi. The fact that the scouts are going to get away on their speeder bikes, or horses in this case, and then one of the heroes jumps onto one of the horses, the speeder bike, the down soldiers, and then chases them and has that fight on the way, knocking the people off their speeder bikes / horses.
Yeah, I mean, he only ends up back in the garrison because he knocks the second person off too late, and the speed carries him in.
Exactly. Yeah. So he's kind of chasing the scouts back to camp, which is Return of the Jedi straight up. You've obviously got the thing with the two lowliest characters from their perspective, and I think that's obviously the strongest influence. But I'm going to break down, because while the film isn't a direct remake, it is a direct remake for the first few minutes, because this is what happens in the first few minutes with the thieves. They are shown to be cowardly and they argue amongst each other about what they're doing, to the point where they split up, and then they both get captured and end up in the exact same place again, which is exactly what happens to the droids at the beginning of Star Wars. Like, to a T, that's what happens to the droids at the beginning of Star Wars. Another thing that happens with the droids and with the farmers is that in both films, they're sort of the only comedy relief characters in both films. And another thing, and this is a stretch, I grant you this is a stretch, but I'm going to bring it up anyway, is R2D2 has the plans to the Death Star in Star Wars, and in Hidden Fortress, it's one of the farmers who has the plans. He writes the plan on the floor. That is a stretch, but I liked it. And then the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, was you have the body double idea of the princess surviving because one of her handmaidens, the sister of the general, has gone and been killed in her place as an imposter, which is another thing that comes up in the Star Wars prequels. So there were those are the things that
isn't there a little festival around a big fire in Jedi as well?
You're right. Actually, like the Ewoks festival. Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely true. So there are a few things that come in. It obviously isn't like for like in much beyond those things, but it's interesting. Some of those seeds. Something more substantive that I want to talk about.
There also doesn't seem to be really a big bad. Like not. There's the army, and the army has got generals and captains and whatever, and there is people who are chasing them down. But there doesn't seem to be a figurehead for this occupying army, really. That is noticeable. They're just on the run generally.
Yeah, an interesting thing I think with that. And I guess this speaks more to that overlying kind of humanism thing with Kurosawa, or maybe it's just about the collectivism of Japanese society as it's talked about, and the way that they don't focus so much on these kind of, doesn't have to involve an individual. But there isn't any concept of, I would argue, there isn't too much of a concept of why the princess is a better leader than the people who've defeated her army and want to capture her. Like, you don't know what that war was about. You don't know who the people who are trying to capture them are. You don't know that they're bad people. They might be running a much nicer kingdom than the princess. You've got no idea. You know, all we know is we lost and we want to get back home. That's what we know. We don't know that they're the good guys. You know, they could be assholes. They could have started that war. For all we know. And there is that kind of thing. There is no, like you say, big bad. There is no element of, I think if there was a kind of a Western remake of Hidden Fortress more directly, you would have to cut to the bastard who's after them. There would have to be an antagonist who is after them, and that just doesn't exist here.
Yeah, that's just not around. There's a couple of people who briefly become kind of spokespeople or figures heads, but there isn't any of that, which I found quite interesting.
Yeah. You get the first time they pass a border checkpoint as well. You get this thing where somebody lets them through, and then they're told a few minutes later by a scout from another group, oh, by the way, look out for some people pretending to, you know, they've got all the wood and they've got the princess, she's undercover. And he's just let them through, this dude. And this is one of those, like, almost like something in Akira or something, this kind of Japanese middle management things that Kurosawa likes to have, where this guy's just embarrassed and kind of worried for his own position, like and he just doesn't. Yeah, he doesn't do anything about it. Like he doesn't follow up on it. He doesn't say, "Oh, they passed here." He just like, keep my job, keep quiet. Let's pretend that didn't happen, which is fun. But something I wanted to bring up that was one of the most, from the context of Kurosawa's filmography, one of the most interesting things about this film. It is semi-famously his first widescreen film, his first film in Toho scope. It's easy to forget that's the case because Seven Samurai is such an epic that whenever I think about it, I automatically my mind just paints it into widescreen automatically. But this is actually his first widescreen film. What did you think? I mean, did that come up for you at all watching it? Did you have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Yeah. There's a bit where there's a few people trying to get across the line, and there's a line of guards. This is right near the beginning, like, and the mist comes across, and they can't get up and over. There's some great scenes. The duel with the kind of the circle of people around them's shot from a very high, wide angle at the back, and you see them circling around. Really looks incredible. There was some other bits. The bit where they're all tied up.
Yeah,
and it's almost like they've used the same set from Rashomon, or when they're kind of in the courtyard, but it all looks really, really good. Yeah, like I say, the Game of Thrones kind of scale of that opening scene as well. I wasn't. I was never particularly struck by any particular images. I think because it's not a ponderous film. It's a rapid plot driven film. I never had that moment where I was sort of looking at the screen and considering the story, or do you know what I mean? It didn't seem to me that they kind of
I know what you mean, like in the way that, for example, Throne of Blood's a very good example of this. Throne of Blood, there's the powerful imagery in that film of Mifune terrified with the arrows coming at him.
Yeah.
If someone says to you Throne of Blood, your mind immediately can kind of thinks of those images.
Or to have a non-Kurosawa example for a second, The Searchers. You know, when you think of The Searchers, you think of John Wayne standing in the doorway, and I know that that's a narrowed, but it's an image that kind of sums up the story and the theme in a way that I didn't feel that stuff was as relevant or as necessary at any particular point in this film.
I think the image I remember from this film, if you just say Hidden Fortress to me, the first thing I'm going to think of is the image of Princess Yuki standing with the kind of thin stick, and she stands in this very rigid way, with her arms kind of triangular with the stick, and she's very sort of her feet kind of planted kind of, I don't know, a foot apart from each other on the floor, and she's got this very rigid posture that's very kind of consistent throughout the film, quite entertaining, very combative, very petulant almost. And that's the kind of the image that comes to mind, is when she's kind of there with the stick, you know, when they're following her through the woods before Mifune comes and threatens to kill them for going near her, and she's kind of whipping them with branches of trees, and kind of it's in that bit where she's kind of very quickly sort of smacking them with her stick. That's sort of the main scene that comes to my head visually.
She's really good.
She is very good.
What's it? Misa Uhara?
Yeah, she wasn't in very many films, actually. I think I couldn't find out biographically why she stopped acting in her early 20s, but based on the context of a lot of other Japanese actresses and things I've read about from the time, my assumption would be she got married and was expected not to be working anymore, because she's in a bunch of films in her like early 20s and then just suddenly no more films.
Yeah,
she's got a very short career. She's very good. She's
got a decent part here as well. I mean, yeah, she has. If you take away the fact she's told to shut up, I mean, acting is more than just the amount of lines that you've got to say anyway. And she sells a lot of it physically as well. But she's just really, really interesting. They're all great characters, but she seemed to me the standout in this. There was one piece that I did rub up against involving her, actually, and that is there's a really ill-advised bit of humour with the two peasants where Mifune's gone off, and they're basically there's a bit where they're drawing lots to assault her, basically.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in the Japanese title of the film, they are bad men. Okay. But yes, I completely agree. The thing that comes out of that scene that's very endearing, though, which kind of turns it around slightly, is that the girl that she has saved from slavery turns up and defends her and stands over her all night with that big rock protecting her, which is a touching moment that isn't played for laughs. It's kind of played for kind of showing how her kindness towards somebody from the peasant classes is kind of being repaid, and how she's formed this relationship with this person. But absolutely, before that, it's played for laughs, isn't it? It's a funny moment that they're having, which is not good in I would say in a 2021 context. I would argue that's probably not good much earlier on. That wouldn't have been good to do.
It was just really, really strange, odd moment, especially when you consider that I know they are. I guess now I know they are bad men. But they have been endearingly squabbling throughout the even if they are kind of like, even if they are a bit shithouse to each other and everybody else around them, they seem so ineffectual that they're still endearing even throughout all their kind of scum and villainy, and that moment kind of is a bit of a screeching gear change, isn't it? Like
it is. It definitely is. It's not that. Yeah, that's not aged super well, that sequence. but it is it is what it is. But yeah, it's no bueno. I feel like we didn't make enough Fire Festival jokes, but I guess the time's passed on that one.
I mean, that is a year old now, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's but yeah. So Hidden Fortress, good film. We both enjoyed it. I guess it's time to put it where you would.
I would also say actually that if, like me, although the whole premise of this podcast was, I mean, I still haven't seen the films that we're watching, the next 11 or whatever we've got left to go, 12 to go. I still haven't seen them yet, but like the whole premise was I'd never seen a Kurosawa film, and now I've seen more than half of them. And I would say so far that if you've never seen a Kurosawa film and you're not willing to watch all of them, which there's no need to, this would be probably the perfect starting point. This would be, if you were just kind of wanting to dip your toe into the waters Kurosawa, I would recommend to anyone the first one they watch would be The Hidden Fortress, because I think it is, from what we've seen so far, I think it is the most accessible. Okay, awesome. It was the first one I ever saw, and it made me think I didn't like Kurosawa, and it was seeing subsequent ones that made me like Kurosawa. So, but I know what you mean. Like I do think purely, but I think that's because of expectations I had in my mind, as we talked about earlier. So I don't think that's necessarily fair. I wonder if you'll still feel the same way after we see Yojimbo. But I agree. Up to this point, it probably is the most straightforwardly crowd-pleasing one. A couple of things I should mention about it, just in passing, before we go on to the ranking thing, is that, like all Kurosawa films of this period, it went over schedule and over budget by loads. Money's on the screen.
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing about it is that it was his biggest hit to this point, box office wise. It was a massive success at the box office, Hidden Fortress in Japan at the time when it came out. Which another thing is that it's the last film he ever made that was produced by Toho. After the success of Hidden Fortress, he completed Hidden Fortress was the last of like a 3-film deal that he had with Toho, which would have been Throne of Blood, Lower Depths, and this. Maybe that explains Lower Depths as that film he snuck in to sort of like get through the deal. But it's like a 3-film deal. And after completing this, Toho go on to distribute a lot of his future films, but he makes most of his future films with his own production company for the next foreseeable after this. And that's the end of a long relationship, because apart from that period where he left Toho due to the strikes and the different weird things that were going on, Toho's been his home from the beginning, more or less, with a few exceptions. So this is his last film produced there. So I'm going to go to the least podcast worthy part of the show.
Yeah, when we finally get an audio only version of this, we're going to have to put a disclaimer
exactly. I'm going to have to edit this. So here we are. We've got the high and low graph, enjoyment versus appreciation axis. Where is Hidden Fortress for you on enjoyment v appreciation?
It is more enjoyed. It's more enjoyed, but less appreciated. More enjoyed and as appreciated, I would say, as Rashomon, but not as I'd say it's as enjoyed as the Seven Samurai. As enjoyed as Seven Samurai and more appreciated as appreciated as Rashomon. So there. Yeah. Okay, nice. So it's top tier Kurosawa. Yeah, this is top tier for me. I really like this one. Are you in a position at this stage to sort of say what your current top 5 is? Because we're kind of halfway. We're just over halfway. I think they're on there. Oh, so it'll be the top. Oh, okay. Let's see how well this graph works. Yeah, you tell me your top 5, and I'll tell you if that's the top right. Seven Samurai, Hidden Fortress, Rashomon, Stray Dog, and Akiru. Yeah, pretty much. Throne of Blood's in that milieu as well in your graph. So maybe that would have been your 6th, but all 5 of those are top right for you. Yeah, that is your canon. Has Throne of Blood done that thing that sometimes happens where it kind of, the further you get from it, it's sort of fallen slightly out of your a little bit. Okay. Yeah, definitely. It definitely I think it's got that such a strong ending. I think that you get hyped up when you finish watching it, and then it falls away ever so slightly, I think. But but yeah, no. Any of those 5 films would be 6 films. Any of those 5 films I mentioned would be ones that I would rewatch, I would imagine, and Throne of Blood possibly, but slightly less so.
Because the next tier after that, the next one in the top right after we get Throne of Blood, Akira Stray Dog, is Drunken Angel. Do you think you'd ever rewatch Drunken Angel, or is that the cutoff point?
I might rewatch Drunken Angel. I might rewatch Drunken Angel.
After that, I think it's the cutoff because it's One Wonderful Sunday.
But there's some stuff in there that I might rewatch One Wonderful Sunday, or maybe not No Regrets of Our Youth. I'd kind of, yeah, I would probably.
I expect you're chomping at the bit to rewatch The Idiot, particularly if they ever get around to finding the 6-hour cut.
Fuck that.
So next up, we have The Bad Sleep Well, which is one.
Do you know what? I've been looking through my notes, and bear in mind this is only 2 or 3 films ago. Yeah. I just looked at I Live in Fear, and I thought, what was that?
I Live in Fear is not quite bottom left for you, but it's in that sector. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so The Bad Sleep Well is up next. We're returning to I think they're the Endaigeki. Jidaigeki is when they are historical films, and Endaigeki is the term in Japanese cinema for contemporary films. So this is a contemporary one. Kurosawa, for most of his career that we've been monitoring here, he tends to alternate, doesn't he? He tends to go one then the other.
But I'm right in thinking that is it Sanjuro comes hot on the heels of Yojimbo?
It does, yeah, it does.
Yeah.
So yeah, and this is just before that, I think after Bad Sleep Well we get the Yojimbo Sanjuro twofer. So what's your expectations for this one? This is one that's very well regarded, but I would say is probably not super well known, so you might not have any conception about it.
according to BFI, which is where I allow myself to do my pre-watching research. It's a loose remake of Hamlet set in a corrupt corporation. It also says down here, Bad Sleep Well comes between the two and is the least well known, talking about Ran and Throne of Blood, least well known. In addition to its contemporary setting, it's also the freest adaptation of the three. So I'm expecting it to not be, especially after watching, although this is a weird comparison because I'm talking about a film that I thought was going to be a remake, but anyway, I'm not expecting it to be a complete analog of Hamlet, but it reminds me straight off the bat. I don't know if you know the 2000 version of Hamlet starring Ethan Hawke.
No, I don't.
That was a contemporary version, I believe, with the original text, an abridged original text, set at the Denmark Corporation, and had Bill Murray as Polonius and Liev Schreiber as I can't remember his name, but Ophelia's brother.
Okay.
And I can't remember somebody else who, there's a few other people in it, but I always wanted to watch that film and never saw it. But I'm quite intrigued by this. I've seen 2 versions of Hamlet in the last 4 months, and that was the first time I'd seen the actual story properly. I sat down and watched the Mel Gibson version, thinking that I was about to watch the Kenneth Branagh version, but it was a DVD that I got free with a Sunday paper years ago and never watched. And I watched the Laurence Olivier version a few weeks ago as well, so I'm quite up on the story, but I mainly know the story from other versions of it. So like there was a TV series called Sons of Anarchy that was about a biker gang that was basically a loose retelling of Hamlet, and The Lion King.
Yeah.
So I don't have as much connection to the story as I did with Macbeth, although I know it. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that's retained, how much of that changes, how much of it is. This one's intriguing. basically.
Yeah, it's a long boy. I think unless I'm forgetting something, this is second longest film. I don't know how long the cut we saw of The Idiot was, but this is 2.5 hours. This one.
Yeah. I think I was having a look at the running times, and I think we're pretty much in the 2 hours plus territory for the rest of the run. I think.
Is Yojimbo that long?
Yojimbo might be the exception,
because I think Yojimbo and Sanjuro are quite kind of frothy, for want of a better word. Yeah, that's Yojimbo's sub 2 hours. Sanjuro is presumably also sub 2 hours. Sanjuro is 95 minutes. Oh,
that's the one. That's
my next lovely Sanjuro. Yeah, I think you'll have a blast with those. I think, but I am super excited to watch this and to watch High and Low again. High and Low, as you know, is my favorite, so we're almost there.
We're only 4 films away from color as well, I believe.
We are, yeah. His first color film is Dodeska Den. So we've got Bad Sleep Well, Yojimbo Sanjuro, High and Low, Redbeard, and then Dodeska Den. So yeah, that's the 6th film from where we are now, and then it's color all the way.
Excellent.
So he's quite late to the party there. His first color film is in the 70s, and color films have been quite common in Japan at this point from the mid 50s on. So he's making that deliberate choice to stay in black and white. So next time around, Bad Sleep Well, I'm sure we'll get around to that within the next 2 weeks, possibly not next weekend, although we'll try to fit it in, but it's a long one, so it obviously depends on everyone's schedules. We'll see you to discuss that one. Thanks for listening to this one, and we look forward to seeing you again.